This is a story about a group of young women who were told the thing killing them was harmless, and what they did when they finally found out the truth. In the spring of 1917, an 18-year-old woman named Grace Fryer walked into a factory in Orange, New Jersey, and started one of the best-paying jobs available to a young working-class woman in America. The United States Radium Corporation, USRC, made luminous watch dials. Millions of them. The military needed them. Soldiers in the trenches of the First World War needed to read their watches in the dark, needed compasses and instruments that glowed when the lights went out. The factory floor was full of young women, most of them teenagers, seated at long tables covered in racks of tiny watch dials waiting to be painted. The paint they used was called Undark. It contained radium. Grace was one of around 70 women working in that room. The work was delicate. The numbers on a watch dial are tiny, and the brush had to hold a point so fine it could barely be seen. The problem was that the brushes lost their shape after a few strokes. The solution, taught to every new worker by their supervisors and demonstrated by their instructors, who sometimes swallowed a little of the paint themselves to show it was safe, was simple. Lip, dip, paint. Put the brush between your lips, shape the tip with your tongue, dip it in the radium paint, paint the dial. Do it again, 250 times a day, 300 times a day, every day. Nobody told Grace Fryer that radium behaves like calcium inside the human body, that once swallowed, it doesn't pass through. It finds bone. It embeds itself in the skeleton and stays there, emitting radiation from the inside, boring holes through the tissue, attacking the marrow, destroying the blood. Nobody told her because the company knew, and the company had decided that the cost of telling her was higher than the cost of not telling her. There was something almost beautiful about the work, in a way that none of them could have understood as dangerous at the time. The radium dust settled on their skin, their hair, their clothes. Under the right conditions, in a dark room, a dark street, a boyfriend's apartment with the lights off, the women glowed. They were called ghost girls. Some of them painted their nails with the leftover radium compound. Some painted their teeth to make them shine in the dark. They laughed about it. They went home luminous and thought nothing of it because they had been told by the people who should have known and did know that it was perfectly safe. By 1922, the first of them was dead. Her name was Amelia Maggia, known to everyone as Molly. She was 24 years old. It started with her teeth, a toothache that wouldn't resolve, a dentist who pulled the tooth and found that the socket wouldn't heal. Then another tooth. Then the jaw itself began to go, the bones softening and breaking down, the tissue dying in a condition that would come to be called radium jaw. By the time Molly Maggia died, her jaw had largely dissolved. Her death certificate listed the cause as syphilis, a diagnosis that was both medically false and strategically useful to the company, carrying with it a stigma that made the dead woman's character, rather than the company's conduct, the subject of public discussion. More women followed. The symptoms came in different orders, but they arrived at the same place. The teeth first, then the jaw, then the spine, beginning to compress, the legs shortening as the bones were eaten from within, spontaneous fractures appearing without any trauma to cause them. Some women woke in the night and caught sight of themselves in a mirror in a dark room and saw what the paint had done to them. Their bones glowed. The radium that had been eating them from the inside was now visible through their skin, a cold light with nowhere to go. USRC knew. They had commissioned an independent study in the early 1920s from researchers at Harvard, a study that confirmed what the bodies were already showing, that the women were being poisoned by radium ingestion in the factory. The company received the findings, altered them, and submitted the falsified version to New Jersey health officials. They hired a doctor named Frederick Flynn to examine the sick women, a man who presented himself as a Columbia University specialist, but was in fact an industrial toxicologist on the company's payroll, unlicensed to practice medicine in New Jersey, whose examinations concluded that the women were in perfectly good health. He said this to Grace Fryer's face while she was sitting in his office, unable to fully open her jaw. A company vice president attended the examination as a witness. Neither man disclosed who they were. When Grace Fryer began to investigate what was happening to her, and to the women around her, and to the women who had already died, She discovered that finding a lawyer willing to take on USRC was nearly impossible. The company was a government contractor. The statute of limitations for workplace injuries in New Jersey was 2 years, and the company intended to use it. Attorney after attorney turned her away. She spent 2 years looking. In 1927, she found Raymond Barry, a young attorney willing to fight a case that most of his colleagues considered unwinnable. Grace brought 4 other women in with her: Quinta McDonald and Albina Larice, sisters, both of them dying, both of them the sisters of Molly Maggia, who had been the first to go, and Catherine Schaub and Edna Hussman. The 5 of them filed suit against USRC for $250,000 each in damages. The newspapers called it the case of the 5 women doomed to die. The women did not object to this framing. They understood exactly what it meant, and they filed anyway. The company's response was to delay. Legal maneuvers stretched the case into 1928. USRC's lawyers argued that the statute of limitations had expired, that whatever had happened to these women had happened too long ago to be actionable now. They argued that the women were suffering from syphilis, not radium poisoning. They argued that radium was not harmful. They filed motions. They requested continuances. The months passed. The women deteriorated. By the time the 5 of them appeared in court in January 1928, 2 were bedridden. Grace Fryer needed a steel back brace to sit upright. Not one of the 5 women could raise her arm high enough to take the oath. Their attorney, Raymond Barry, hired a 30-year-old physicist named Elizabeth Hughes to examine them. Hughes used an electroscope to measure the radioactivity in their breath. Her testimony was precise and devastating. All 5 women had ingested so much radium that their breath was itself radioactive. They were emitting radiation from the inside. Their bodies had become the evidence. The press coverage was extraordinary. Headlines tracked the women's deterioration alongside the legal proceedings. Readers followed the case the way they followed a serial drama. Except the 5 women at the center of it were sitting in courtrooms in back braces and wheelchairs, visibly dying. And this was not fiction. One newspaper canvassed 10 randomly selected women about what they would do with $250,000 if they had only a year to live. Most said they would give it away. USRC settled out of court before a verdict could be reached. Each woman received $10,000, a fraction of what they had sought, and a $600 annual pension, and their medical bills covered for the rest of their lives. None of them would live more than 2 more years. Grace Fryer died in October 1933 at the age of 34. Her cause of death was a radium-induced sarcoma of the shoulder. Catherine Schaub died the same year. The settlement was small. What it built was not. The case of the Radium Girls was the first in American legal history in which corporate liability for industrial poisoning was established in a way that stuck. It directly shaped the labor laws that followed. Laws requiring employers to cover industrial poisoning in their workers' compensation provisions. When the Manhattan Project began in the 1940s, and thousands of workers were suddenly handling radioactive materials on an industrial scale, the safety standards that protected them were built on the data gathered from the bodies of the Radium Girls. One Atomic Energy Commission official said it plainly. Without the dial painters, the project's management could have reasonably rejected the extreme precautions being urged on them, and thousands of workers might still have been in danger. When researchers later exhumed the body of Molly Maggia, the first woman who died, the one whose death had been officially attributed to syphilis, they found 48.4 micrograms of radium in her bones. That is 500 times what would later be established as the safe limit for human body burden. She had been dead for 5 years. Her bones still glowed in the dark. Grace Fryer knew when she brought the case that it was not going to save her. The radium was already inside her. There was no treatment and no removal. She knew what was coming. She said at the time, "It is not for myself I care. I am thinking more of the hundreds of girls to whom this may serve as an example." She was right about all of it.